After departing Morocco, crossing the channel that separates Africa and Europe, the Strait of Gibraltar, I arrived in the port town of Tarifa, Spain. Tarifa is a famous location for windsurfing, being not only the divider of two continents, but also the division between the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. While exploring Europe's southernmost tip, a massive storm hit.
Here we are, Las Palomas. This is basically the most southern point in all of Europe. It's where the Atlantic Ocean over there meets the Mediterranean Sea. Our wind is insane. Just feeling that force. Wow. And you can see why this place is famous for windsurfing. There we go. Most southern point in all of Europe. Right here.
Following day after the weather cleared, I left with a few friends from my hostel to go visit Gibraltar, a territory that was ceded to Britain by Spain in 1713 and has become a geographic strategic location for Britain ever since. Its main feature is the Rock of Gibraltar, which is home to approximately 300 Barbary Macaques.
What are you eating?
These primates originally came from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco centuries ago.
Yum, yum, yum. Yummy. They steal your cameras apparently. These are the macaques of Gibraltar. The Rock of Gibraltar. Any left? Are you hungry? This one over here on the tree looks really cool.
Due to being condensed in such a small place, it is forced to host one of the coolest airport runways in the world.
This is Gibraltar. It's the only airstrip in the world where you'll see a plane land in the middle of the road. Right there. And they stop all the cars, you can see behind lined up, just for the plane.
Historically, the Rock of Gibraltar was known as one of the Pillars of Hercules by ancient Greeks. It is riddled with fortresses and tunnels and has been used as a fortification since AD 711 by the Moors, Spaniards, and of course the British in World War II. The next day I jumped on a rideshare to the city of Cadiz, where I caught up with my friend Or, who I met in Morocco. Cadiz is known for its classical architecture and fortifications, brilliant Atlantic sunsets, and some of the best seafood in all of Europe. After a couple of days of exploring this beautiful seaside town, it was time to move on to the capital of Andalusia, Sevilla, or Seville. I didn't realise before booking my accommodation, but the week leading up to Easter or Holy Week is quite a big deal in Sevilla. My arrival day was my opportunity to check out the local attractions before the religious ceremonies began. I made my way out to the Plaza de España, which was built in Baroque Revival grandeur in 1928 for the Ibero-American Exposition. It was a perfect setting to witness my first flamenco performance. Before the evening's religious processions, I checked out the World Heritage listed Real Alcazar, originally an Arabic Moorish fortress turned Baroque palace. Known as Semana Santa, Catholics globally flock to Seville to witness this unique tradition. From someone who has not ever been exposed to this culture, my first impressions were quite confronting. Masked men in hoods that resemble the Ku Klux Klan, carrying around religious items and relics, handing out candy to children. The tradition goes back before the 16th century, where the hoods were worn by sinners who would be showcased around town on a donkey. Locals would throw food scraps at the sinners, but their shame and identity was to remain hidden only for God to judge. The acknowledgement of all men being sinners was incorporated into the Andalusian passion ceremonies by the wearing of the traditional costumes, carrying crucifixes and valuable relics of Jesus and the Virgin Mary through town.
Plaza de España, Sevilla.
My last day of the Semana Santa ceremonies. After a quick revisit to the Plaza de España, I met up with my Italian friend Andreas, whom I visited Gibraltar with. We checked out one last eerie procession from their balcony at night. This tradition predates the KKK's usage of similar garments in the USA, and some would argue was directly taken from its original intent and used by hate groups in America. Even so, it still seemed very bizarre to watch as an outsider.
Partying tonight.
After that strange and somber experience, it was time to get away from the crowds of Semana Santa and get some chill time. headed out to Lagos in Portugal on the Algarve Coast. I spent my first afternoon exploring the beautiful crumbling sea cliffs and rock formations that I would spend the following day kayaking through before witnessing the most spectacular sunset.
Here I am on the Algarve Coast, just outside of Lagos in Portugal. You can see these beautiful cliffs here. I've been walking along. The scenery is absolutely stunning. See down there. A little bit of a drop, just a little. Waiting out here for sunset. I think it's going to be a pretty good one.
Even though I miscalculated sunset due to a time zone change, the setting sun on my walk back displayed an array of colours over the Atlantic. My morning started with yoga hosted by my hostel, before heading down to the beach to explore this unique coastline the best way possible, by sea kayak. Kayaking gives the opportunity to explore caves and narrow passages that cannot be as easily accessed by motorized boats. The coastline was not only dramatic and spectacular, but also contained many hidden treasures not seen from the land. A definite must for anybody planning to visit Lagos. After a little adventure in R&R, I made my way up to Portugal's largest city and capital, Lisbon. This was my second trip to this amazing city. My first was 10 years prior on my very first trip to Europe. I started off with the walking tour which led me to its Moorish castle on the hilltops. Experiencing extreme deja vu, I realised after about an hour of exploring the castle that I had been there 10 years prior. My initial thought, however, was how empty the place was 10 years before and how overwhelmingly busy it had become. A place I intended to visit on my first trip to Portugal, but never made it to, was Porto. The northern Portuguese city, whose name is synonymous with fortified port wine, was amazing to discover. From the UNESCO Old World architecture and charm to its lively atmosphere of street performers and musicians on the Douro River. Porto quickly became one of my favourite cities in Europe. A highlight for me was a tour of the Cullen Port Cellar Caves. Located in a cavern underground, we were explained the history of the fortified wine, which became popular in England during the early 1700s. It could last the extended journeys at sea, while England was at war with France, leaving French wine in short supply. We were able to sample the wine and were treated to traditional Portuguese folk music known as fado.
calhadas, cheirinho ao rio, o cacho de uvas doiradas, duas rosas no jardim.
The following morning I was to board a bus to Spain. My original plan for this trip was to walk or cycle the famous route known in Spanish as El Camino de Santiago. This trip is traditionally known as a religious pilgrimage to the shrine of St. James the Apostle in the town of Santiago de Compostela in the northwest of Spain. Hundreds of thousands of people walk or cycle this pilgrimage every year, even those who aren't religious like myself since medieval times, which has garnered a UNESCO World Heritage status. The journey can take weeks or months depending on departure location. Unfortunately, time wasn't on my side, and in a rush to get to France to meet my parents, I cut my time short and visited Lyon with its magnificent 13th century Gothic cathedral and surrounding countryside. Afterwards, I headed out to Basque Country and met up with mi amiga Miriam in Bilbao. As a fellow tour guide, she showed me the best places for the city's famous tapas known as pinchos in the bars around town. She also gave me great recommendations for sightseeing the following day, including great vistas to walk to and the Guggenheim Art Museum. Before exiting Spain, I had a quick break at the seaside holiday resort town of San Sebastian. Unfortunately, I was stuck with heavy rain during my visit, but I did get a chance to visit its hilltop fortress for some magnificent views. My time in southern France was quite short due to time constraints. My first stop was France's second largest city and one of its major wine capitals, Bordeaux. Having only a day to explore as much as possible, I rented a bike and compiled a massive checklist of all things to see. Historical sites such as the Place de la Bourse and the 13th century Gothic Saint André Cathedral. Riding over the Pierre. To the more modern sites like Darwin, Caserne-Niel, an abandoned former military barracks taken over by modern urban artists and activists, as well as the Chaban del Mar lift bridge. I was fascinated by the architectural beauty of this classic city and the friendliness of its people, but I couldn't leave without a trip to a cellar and some wine. Afterwards, I travelled to the small city of Tours on the Loire River and organised a bicycle for my 3-night Loire Valley journey. My first day was 75 kilometres to the town of Sinai, stopping along the way at the Chateau de Villandry with its spectacular gardens in full spring bloom. And next onto Chateau d'Azay-le-Radio, which appeared to float with its mirror image reflecting in its moat. And lastly onto Sinai as the rain hit.
Okay,
day 2 of my cycling Loire Valley trip to the fortress of Chinon.
The fortress of Chinon tells an amazing tale of history, which was at one stage used as the main stronghold and residence of King Henry II of England. Also Richard the Lionheart. Both are buried at a nearby abbey which I visited afterwards. Then under French rule became the capital of France for a small period of time, and later the place where Joan of Arc first had contact with the uncrowned King Charles VII of France. Such a significant place left to ruins for hundreds of years, most of its structure stolen for building materials used elsewhere by the public.
Doing a bit of a cycling trip, some beautiful flowers here, and let's have a look. Okay, they've run off. We've got a lot of bees. Some typical French countryside scenery here. Vineyards.
After a stop at Fontevraud Abbey, I passed the beautiful Chateau of Montsoreau.
We are just about to come up to the famous Chateau Montsoreau. It's a beautiful part of central France.
Passing the unique town of Sauzet-Champigny with its homes and chateaux built into old caves, I arrived into the beautiful Semana at sunset. I did a quick shop for a well-earned home-cooked meal and a bottle of Loire Valley wine in my €27 per night Airbnb apartment on a nearby island. After coordinating several trains, I arrived in Paris at the same time as my dad Gary, my stepmom Kathy, and my girlfriend Miranda, checking into our hotel neighbouring the Eiffel Tower. Dad and Kathy had never visited Paris before. However, this was my second and Miranda's third trip, and even though we had already been, no trip is complete without a walk along the Seine and a trip to the world-famous Louvre Museum.
This is the best thing I've seen all day.
That night we all experienced for the first time the Moulin Rouge dinner and show. Unfortunately they don't allow cameras, but the performances were spectacular. We also checked out an underground jazz and blues club, which was featured in the film La La Land. And the Palace of Versailles, which was the long-time residence of the French royal family until the revolution in the 1700s. On our final day in Paris, we explored the world's largest catacombs. Located beneath the city, it contains around 6 million remains, topped off by a dinner in the Sacré-Cœur region. As we said a temporary goodbye to Dad and Kathy until rejoining us back in Munich a couple of weeks later, Miranda and I headed to the French-German border city of Strasbourg. We spent the evening taking in the sights of this charming medieval town.
Strasbourg, the border of France and Germany. Isn't that right, Miranda?
That's correct.
After viewing its astonishing cathedral, we had pizza at potentially one of the best pizza places I have ever been to, called Pizza Rome Strasbourg.
Beautiful city. That is the cathedral and towers.
And on our final full day in France, we rented bikes and headed over the Rhine River to Germany, stopping at some beautiful lakes, old fortresses, and admiring the Rhine Valley countryside.
Okay, here we are on the Rhine River, crossing from Germany back into France. Miranda's having fun. We're all having fun. There it is. Here we go. And now we are in France. Woo!
Before boarding our bus to Munich and saying au revoir to France, we had to climb to the top.
Where are we, Miranda?
We're in the tower.
The tower. Tower of Terror. We're in Strasbourg. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
That's correct. This is the tower of the Cathedral, Notre Dame.
The cathedral was the tallest building in the world for 227 years, from 1647 to 1874. Not a bad way to finish a 2-month journey starting in Morocco.